Extending Commission on Education in order. Welcome. We have a change in the order of presentations today. We have, before we can do minutes, we don't have a quorum yet, so once that occurs, we'll approve minutes. First, we're going to go to item number 6. Welcome, new superintendent of schools, David Roach. Congratulations on your position.
Thank you, sir.
So I'll have you come on up and you give your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Elligan, Vice Chair Roberts. I would like to share with you a handout that we're giving right now. It's very simple, but it is our vision for education. And I'll start while those are being passed out. To be college or career ready, our students need a strong foundation in the core academics, reading, writing, and mathematics. To achieve this goal, we are utilizing a uniform and aligned approach. This will ensure we are providing resources that support students and educators. In order to connect students' academic journey to success beyond the K-12 education. First, our plan is centered around the strong partnerships and collaborations as sustained by continuous improvement. The State School Board of Education is determined to improve student outcomes. Our West Virginia governor and legislators like you understand the role education plays in the promise of our state. We need students, families, local boards of education, businesses, industry, community, and leaders across our state to embrace this effort. We cannot accomplish any of this alone. Our university partners need to support the state reading strategy by requiring coursework and clinical training rooted in the science of reading, which you'll hear more about from Dr. Burke. Recruit, support, and retain teachers and principals. An important part of this goal is to enroll students in the Grow Your Own West Virginia Pathway to Teaching initiative. We need our best and brightest in the classroom now and in the future. All 55 counties are encouraged to participate in this initiative. We currently have 31. I'm determined to get 55. The more we have, the quicker our teacher shortage will be less, or be quicker to get accomplished. Uniformed, aligned approach to student success. A strategic alignment of all professional development experiences to strengthen the core curriculum instruction. This includes all county and school level employees. Comprehension support for identified schools. We need the positive student outcomes in our lowest performing schools by providing continuous school improvement support. Connect high school to the 3 E's: education, employment, and enlistment. Ensure students are future focused and prepared for the workforce of today and tomorrow by providing multiple opportunities to explore post-secondary options for education, employment, and enlistment. They deserve the best we have to offer them. The first focus that we have at the department, as of course I've shared with you, you understand, and I have advocated for since assuming the superintendent's position in August, that literacy is the key that unlocks the door to students and our state success. From my first day in office in August of this year, I committed that the Department of Education return to the focus of academic achievement. Our approach is simple: prioritize reading, writing, and math at the elementary level to build a solid foundation for our youngest learners. At the secondary level, we will continue to build and advance skills in reading and math to ensure students can confidently pursue additional education opportunities. I'm not going to stand here and make excuses. Reports on our assessments and student achievement have been a true call to action, and one that I hope everyone will rally around. We must recognize this moment for the urgency it carries. Our students and the progress of West Virginia depend on it. We must aggressively address low student achievement in our state with urgency. The stakes are far too high and a failure is not an option. Our children require the advanced learning and skills necessary to compete in the existing and emerging economies of the world. Locally, our state relies on a prepared and skilled workforce to attract economic development. Senator Tarr shared with me that we were come from 10th to 50th. Excuse me, from 50th to 10th in opportunities for economic development being attracted to businesses. I hope we can do the same. It may take a little longer than it did on that, but I know we can do it. I'm determined to do it. As far as our task is not only to improve our West Virginia education system to levels before the pandemic, which were not the best, but also to take voter action to elevate and lead the nation in our work. Our focus on literacy is more than words. It must be part of our culture as a Department of Education, as county boards of education, as individual schools, local communities, and the state as a whole. This is a job beyond the ability of one state agency. Instead, the state as a whole and all the entities within it must work to build and advance reading, literacy, and writing. We must have a vision for all things that we do. Efforts without a true focus and vision can be misguided and even a waste of time and resources. Vision gives us a shared purpose and goal we can reach together. I plan on using social media. I'm going to reach the parents through the PTO. We're going to have video. We're going to show parents how phonics works, how the parents at home can also create a very reading worthy environment as much as our teachers do. Our focus on building literacy among our students is one of the most important endeavors of my career. Some of the highlights of our plan moving forward include addressing reading deficiencies using personalized planning, intensive strategies and intervention, and instructional materials that address the science of reading, which is phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, plus writing. Employing and training early childhood classroom assistant teachers. Some call it ECATs for grades 1 through 3. Expanding the use of reading coaches in districts and schools by requesting additional funding to hire, train, and deploy reading specialists, beginning in our comprehensive support and improvement of identified CSI schools as a first priority. Using strategies that have been effective with our CSI schools, returning to in-person professional development for school teams that will learn and implement strategies and target continuous improvement. Assembling best practices from the counties that are achieving higher levels of proficiency. Engaging parents and stakeholders to be true partners in this endeavor of increasing literacy in our state. The House and Senate will be important to this endeavor because we must have a literacy vision for our state, and this vision must incorporate everyone. This will allow us to broaden the scope and voices of those who will bring insight, ideas, solutions, and support of literacy to the table. We have some excellent teachers, some of the best in the whole U.S., but we are not utilizing them. I want them to be our leaders for other teachers, to show how to implement the strategies that we know work. Again, from Dr. Burke, I think what Mississippi has done is unbelievable. Florida has done a good job. There's many others, 25 to 35 states that have implemented some kind of literacy strategy in their legislative agenda over the past few years. Our plan must ensure that families are a part of the children's educational journey and that the community stands ready to support literacy as well. We cannot do this work alone, as I shared with you. If we truly want reading skills to increase and improve, we must be bold enough to explore new approaches while reinforcing traditional strategies that have a proven track record. I believe there is a renewed interest in working together because failure is not an option. Students must have the skills to pursue the options of today and tomorrow in our vast, fast-paced economy. We owe the next generation every opportunity to succeed. Our students deserve the best, and we must offer it to them. And I thank you for this opportunity. I also have that I may share with you, if I might. Do I have a few more minutes? Could we have those passed out? I'll start sharing with you a draft. And this started, have listened to Ms. Ward. She was kind enough with Educational Alliance to join us in a Zoom conference. And we developed for Senator Grady some talking and draft points that we feel is needed in legislation. As I shared with you, we cannot do this alone. We need your help. First of all, if you look at it is a draft because that's all I have right at this point. If you look at the state, you'll see check marks. You see Mississippi, Florida, and North Carolina to your left. These are things that on the right side where it says component that we would like to see happen. Some we need you, some we don't. Start with the first. Use screeners and or benchmarks assessment. And I'll just kind of skip through these because you're able to read these. Also, additional screeners for benchmark assessment at least 3 times at the beginning. Approved no less than 4 universal reading screener assessments. Create a committee, and this committee is made up of all the stakeholders in the education as far as in our counties to create what we would call cut-off scores or cut scores, because sometimes screeners, different counties have cut scores that may say that you're a great reader in one county if you get this score, but the next county over will have a different cut score, and it may be exactly on target, where one of the counties may have it so low that it gives false readings of how well you are doing. As you can see in the next group, students substantiate reading deficiencies. Instead of reading this to you, I'll just let you look at that if it's okay. You turn to the back. Parent identification and support. As I shared with you before, we want our parents involved. They are critical for our success. And the last one, additional support structures for implementation. I want to use social media. I really do. I think we can put videos on there. We can put so much information for everyone, even in this room, that know nothing about teaching reading or fun. We can teach you. A lot of children when you look at your lower SES family, they have a difficult time. When phonics is not taught in the classroom, it's usually the lower SES, they do not get it at home. But your middle and upper SES groups, families, they teach it. They sound out the words. When they're at home reading with their parents, it happens. And so they're learning reading. It is not anymore that low-income families can be taught to read. Unless you have a severe challenge, you can learn to read using the science of reading. Everyone can. Again, unless you are severely challenged, then you can't. You may never get there that way. But hopefully we will take them as far as we can. That's all I have. Chairman Howard, take any question, have a seat, whatever you want.
We'll open up to some questions.
Yeah, the question I have, we're rating these children on test scores. And is there any way we can implement where the teacher has a lot to say instead of just test scores? Because we've heard, last year when we did this, we've heard a lot of people say that their kids don't test well and these kinds of things. But is there a way that the teacher has a lot of say about that? And the other thing is, if they're not confident by third grade, are we going to hold them back or are we going to just push them on through?
In my rough draft of what I would like to see happen, I'll answer the last question first. I would like to have not severe, but intensive remediation or training in summer school starting at the first grade. Not wait to third grade and then have them repeat. I don't think that's fair. And I think if we would intervene in the first with intensive reading instruction, intervene in the second, same thing in the third, we probably would have very few that would fail. Our problem is waiting to third grade and then trying to do something, and that's in the draft, and I'm kind of pulling away from that we do it all 3 years. But we can do it. I mean, there's no question we can change the course of where we are.
But as you know, children mature differently at different ages.
Yes, sir.
And we set everything on their age. But if a child at this age doesn't mature, it would be very beneficial in these first 3 grades because that's not a stigma that's going to go with them. If they were held back then, just because of the maturity to give them the opportunity to grow. I've seen this where if they aren't held back, they struggle, they keep on continuously struggling. And you hold them back 1 year and it's just like a big light was turned on. And now they're, instead of the bottom of the class, they're middle to the top of the class.
I don't know if that would come from any type of legislation or any type something from us. I think that's a local decision, honestly, between the school, the parent, teacher, what's best for that child. But to stand here and say, something's better than not, I couldn't answer that. Because we do have and have had, and I've experienced some people in upper grades wanting to do that and talking about maturity and simply doing it for athletics. And it's just hard to get involved unless you're at the school with that teacher and the principal and the parent making that decision. And I would say along with the counselor also. I think that's a case by case scenario. I'm not opposed to it. We have done that in my experience, but it's been rare, but it has been beneficial for the child when we did do it because they were not mature. But as far as getting the reading skills, I know our teacher of the year, I forgot her name, but in Morgan town, she is very disappointed in kindergarten when her children are not reading in kindergarten and leaving. We can do it. I'm not worried about that. I'm not even worried about the maturity. I think by the end of third grade, we can make every child successful. The only difference is like when a low SES child comes to kindergarten, the research says it's probably about 5,000 word vocabulary. A middle income child may be around 9 or 10,000, and the upper income is around 15 to 20,000 words by the time they get to kindergarten. That's where in the science of reading vocabulary, it's very important that we introduce vocabulary from kindergarten right on up.
Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent, I'm going to ask you a question for you. I know you are just taking over this position, so you may not be able to answer past this. And it's difficult to legislate. From our standpoint, to legislate things to be done in the education system. I mean, we're trying to give you the tools and the guidelines that you need. Most of these points and components you have here and the assessments. We had legislation last year that we introduced from K-3. The concern that I think a lot of us in the community had was we would assume these things were being done. And kind of flabbergasted that these weren't being done. These children weren't being assessed pre-K during K through 3 and having those interventions because there's mechanisms already set up. Have any explanation or why this wasn't occurring? Because we don't want to micromanage. I don't think we do. But we do want to give you the tools to do this, and we're looking at with you taking over that. Maybe we can get these accomplished. But we're hesitant to start any new legislation. What should we do? I think that's from our standpoint. We want to see these kids achieve, but we also are seeing back. I know it takes a lot of parental involvement, especially. But what can we do? What else can we do other than the legislation we read? Because we're finding issues the same legislation. It matches up with most of these. Give us any insight into that?
Well, I'll share. I have more of an influence as county superintendents than authority. And whenever we have legislation, for example, if we pick out 4 screeners, and these are the only screeners that you're allowed to use, that means we've researched them. These are quality screeners, and they have to be used if it's in legislation. Instead of maybe another screener, not effective. We're setting the cut scores. So we know that if they're on level in reading, that this assessment is showing that they are or not, and not give a reading that would be on level when they're not. And so when they get to the summative assessment, then they kind of, what I would say, for better words, fail instead of being proficient. And I've learned a little something since Dr. White shared with me that normally a child takes a test and it's usually 15 to 20% more students would be proficient that would show because they're very at or near proficient. And given another day, they might be on proficient where others would drop off. Just it's one snapshot, one time. But our assessments wouldn't do that. They would show consistent benchmark.
I understand that. We don't want them to fail that.
Right.
But the assessments of each grade, you were assuming that was already true. Children were being identified for extra supplemental help. And that's where we felt that that wasn't being. You don't have an explanation for how we collect that or what we have to do.
I think this will help us to achieve what you want and what we want.
Well, I think we're prepared to move something similar to this.
There's no question.
Superintendent, thank you for being here, and I've got to kind of stretch you through here a little bit.
No problem.
We're going to try to work through this a little bit. During the regular session this year, we had a bill that came for us that basically said that if a student wasn't performing at the third grade level at the end of the third grade in math or
Readings, numeracy.
reading, they were going to be held back. And during that discussion, in the beginning of that discussion, I thought it probably was a good idea. But as we discussed that further, I asked an individual from the board at that time, or from the Department of Education, how many of our third graders we were going to have to hold back, and the number was astonishing. It's 80% third graders. And I said, is that 80% of third graders in one school? Is it 80% of the third graders in one county? Is it 80% of the third graders in the state? And the answer was 80% of the third graders in the state would have to be held back. And I kind of went off a little bit. All of a sudden I started looking at this whole spectrum. And we blame teachers for this in the past. And it's 80% of the kids are not learning. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not the county superintendent's fault. It may not be your fault. But I had granddaughter in the third grade. And when I went home, I told the parents, I want to see the literature that they're giving her to learn how to read. Have you looked at that? That's garbage. It's absolute garbage. The material that we're putting before these kids, it's bilingual. It's got little parts of this heritage and little parts of that heritage, and it's got words in there that I couldn't pronounce. I mean, it's terrible. And as an adult, I'm 76 years old. I've been reading since I was in the first grade. And I'm finding words in that curriculum for the third graders that I couldn't pronounce. I couldn't even read what they were. I had no idea what the meaning of some of these were. And we're asking our kids to learn how to read with this garbage. And I'm going to ask you, what happened to Dick, Jane, and Sally?
Not sure, but I know
It was a heck of a program, and a lot of people learned really well how to read. And they didn't have all of this bilingual stuff that kids don't understand. And I believe that whoever is looking at curriculum better take a real hard look, or our kids still aren't going to learn how to read. And that's a problem. And you're at the top. I think the buck stops with you.
well, I accept the responsibility. I don't mind that. I can't answer your question of what 55 counties are doing as far as you mentioned in third grade, as far as the reading material, but we can take a look at that and find out. Let you know. It may
Would
be
you
just-
do that?
Yes, sir. I sure will. I'm happy to.
For time, I'm gonna limit the question, because we have a couple more presentations, sorry about that. But I'd like to have superintendent back in the next two session. Questions you may have, give her a clerk. See if we can pass them on, things you need for us to work on this session to try to help you achieve this. Actually, bring those to us. So we can have them.
I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Sorry about limited questions, because we started late, we have two more presentations to go, so we have this for 5:30, so I'm gonna try to get there. We have item number 4, competency and literacy in math for Thursday, which follows up on what we were just talking about. We have Kimona Burke, senior policy fellow from XLM, Ned Witterson, Damian Dakota, senior policy director at ECF Math. And We have them on virtual here. So welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
We can hear you. So you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to ask if you can see it. One moment. Okay, I think screen sharing has been disabled, so if someone will allow me to share my screen.
It's up.
All right, thank you. You're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Kim Yana Burke, and I'm the Senior Policy Fellow for Early Literacy at Excel in Ed. I have been with Excel in Ed, it'll be 3 years in February. I'm the former State Literacy Director for the Mississippi Department of Education, where I led our initial implementation of the Literacy-Based Promotion Act from 2013 to 2019. And during that time, we implemented a comprehensive early literacy policy. I heard the superintendent talk about a lot of the key points that I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to go into a little more depth with those points and implementation, but I'm also going to share some of the West Virginia NAEP data. I'm going to look at recent data and look at the trends and just really kind of have a conversation around how West Virginia is performing as a state nationally, but also with your subgroups and how that performance has been faring as well. Anytime I talk about data, I always say that this is just an opportunity for us to figure out where we are, to identify where we are, and then to identify how we can get better. I heard, of course, the conversation leading into this presentation, and I, have done, of course, some research on West Virginia, and I know that in 2014, you all did pass the House Bill 4618 that talked about, a comprehensive approach to early literacy. You also last year amended a rule, right, that also talked about this transformative system of support for students and for early literacy. And anytime I testify or talk to committees, the question from legislators is always, well, what do you need from us? Why do you need a law, right? If we have our Department of Education that is saying that these things should be done, then why do you need a law? And I think that a majority of the time, the purpose of a law is to ensure that these things are happening everywhere. You will have some instances where there are some school districts where some of these things are being done, but are they being done everywhere? So when we think about the law that you all have passed, the rules that you've passed, and after I've reviewed those different pieces of text, there were very general statements about how to do this, how to improve literacy outcomes. But what I'm going to talk about today, and to really kind of affirm some of the things that the superintendent talked about, is how we can be more specific in our language and our asks around transforming education opportunities for all students. So what is a comprehensive approach? We talk about it, we said we want a comprehensive approach. What does that include? So it includes supports for teachers and policy, right? How can we ensure that our teachers have the knowledge and the skills to teach children how to read, to teach all children how to read? Sometimes teachers come through their teacher preparation programs, and there's this false sense of when you go into your classroom on day one, the children are just going to be ready. They're going to be ready for you to deliver your instruction, and they'll be able to pick up where you begin. And that's just not the case everywhere. There are going to be students who are struggling readers. How do we ensure that our teachers know what to do and how to address those struggling readers, and also that our administrators know these things as well, so that they can provide that support to teachers and that they can hold them accountable for doing these things? We know that leadership is key. Our administrators are those who set the tone for the culture of the school, and it has to be a focus on early literacy in math, And of course, how with literacy, how we can infuse literacy in the other content areas as well. So science of reading training, let's ensure our teachers have the knowledge and skills to teach all children how to read. The next very important component, and something that we leveraged here in Mississippi greatly, and also with science of reading training, we had statewide literacy training. We trained, I know, 25,000 or more teachers to this point since 2014 in the science of reading. The next one is the reading coaches. In Mississippi, we strategically place reading coaches beginning in our lowest performing schools. Our coaches are there to assist teachers in making the shift to strengthening their instructional practices. I've been watching football today, and just to see that these NFL players, as great as they are, right? They've been drafted. They still have coaches. There's a head coach, there's a quarterback's coach. Like, there are coaches along the way to continue to help them get better at their craft, right? So reading coaches in schools do that for teachers. They help them to translate this theory about the training and how children learn into practice. And they provide that support and they coach them through that. The next component is educator preparation program coursework. Yes, we're talking about an investment now into teachers' knowledge, but wouldn't it be great if we were able to ensure that within their educator preparation programs, before they exit, that they begin learning this science of reading, how to teach students with all of the 5 pillars, the components of reading, with the phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, but then also how to administer screeners. Then how to use that data in order to make instructional decisions for students. And I heard someone say earlier about, you asked if students were to be retained in 3rd grade, how many students would that be? And someone said 80%. If there are 80% of students who are not on grade level in 3rd grade, then that's an issue that could have, and I heard the superintendent say, been identified in kindergarten. This is not just a 3rd grade teacher's responsibility to get children ready to read. How do we identify students early and often and address those deficiencies? But we have to make sure that this new crop of teachers who will be exiting educator preparation programs, that they have this knowledge, and that those who are now standing in front of children every day, that they also have this knowledge. And then, of course, the last thing would be funding. We have to make sure that there is funding that's dedicated to supporting these efforts, but also one thing that we want to do is to be able to ensure that our school districts are making the right decisions, because school boards are making decisions all the time about the materials that they adopt. We want them to adopt the right materials, right? Because this is already an item that they purchase. So how can we make sure it's the right thing? If they're already purchasing screeners, how do we make sure that they're the right screeners that are going to yield the information that we need? So some of these things also, as it relates to funding, are just making sure that we're being more efficient with the funding that they already have. And then, of course, providing that funding to ensure that these other components are being implemented successfully. The next piece is assessment and parental notification. How do we ensure that our parents are partners and engaged from the beginning? We have to notify parents early as soon as we receive the data that a student may have a reading deficiency. And again, that begins as early as kindergarten. Universal and dyslexia screening notification. We have both here in Mississippi. We do have a list of approved universal screeners. Parent notification of reading deficiency, a letter that is sent to parents to say, we've screened your child may be considered at risk. These are some things that we're going to do at school to address the reading deficiency, but also these are some resources that you can use at home to partner with us in order to ensure that your child is becoming a successful reader. And next is instruction and intervention. This is the core of instruction. We talk so much about intervention, and how we can remediate with students. We really have to start having a serious conversation about the quality of core instruction, the instruction that all students receive just by being a part of the classroom, right? How can we make sure that our teachers have those high quality instructional materials? And I heard the same person say earlier about, okay, what they're using to teach, it matters, the materials that are being used, right? Louisiana this year actually banned any material that was that has 3 cueing. Arkansas did the same thing last year. And that just means any material that is prompting students to guess at words, to guess vocabulary, to utilize pictures, to identify words, and it really takes their attention away from decoding, sounding out, using phonics, being able to practice that and apply that skill. So we want teachers to have high quality instructional materials in the classroom, individual reading plans for students, not IEPs. These are called IRPs, where once students are identified, that the teachers are really taking an intentional approach to providing interventions to this student and progress monitoring and putting it in a place in an individual reading plan where they can see if the interventions are working or not. And then of course, additional interventions, monitoring the progress of those, opportunities for summer reading camps to ensure that children get an opportunity for the summer to address any interventions, and parent resources. Now, Mississippi, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, other states, we do have a promotion component, promotion retention component to our law. The goal is, again, that by the time students reach 3rd grade, that we have provided all of these other things prior to the student reaching 3rd grade to ensure that we do not have 80% of our students who are failing. That number, of course, as we begin putting these resources into place, that number is greatly reduced, and only those students who need that intensive intervention or another year of schooling in that grade would be retained. So let's get into how this landscape is across the country. If you take a look at this map, on this map, recently this year, ExcelinEd worked with Virginia to pass its literacy law, Alaska to pass its Alaska Reads law, and also just several other states. Delaware was one of them as well, Kansas, Kentucky. So we worked with these states to pass these laws. And my colleague always calls us like a think tank and a do tank. So once our advocacy team and we work to get laws passed, then we also work with state education agencies to implement the laws, because passing it is the great first step. Implementation comes next. How do we ensure that what we're putting on paper is actually being done in the classrooms and in the schools and the school districts? Now, I'll say this according, just in response to some of the things that were asked earlier about, okay, well, why is it that we think we have some of these things in law already? What's happening and why aren't some things happening? And I'll just say this in response to that. When I looked at the law and the rule, of course, there are specifics like those that I talked about earlier that have to be captured in legislation around what the criteria should be for screeners, not naming a vendor, but just saying that if you're adopting a universal screener, these are the things that it should screen for. These are the materials, these are the criteria for the materials. Parental notification, also the boots on the ground support. That's going to be extremely important. So how do we know what's happening on the ground? We actually have to be on the ground, right? We have to be on the ground and not just evaluating, but also coaching and making sure that teachers are doing what needs to be done. If our teachers knew what to do, all of the things, they'd be doing it already. So let's not take it for granted, and let's provide them and their leaders with the support that they need to make this shift and to strengthen instruction. Okay, so now I'm going to go into data. And again, once I begin talking about data, especially on these slides, you're going to see like a 20-year trend line. As you know, NAEP is administered every 2 years. We did not administer, NAEP was not administered in 21 because of COVID, post-COVID, and it was administered again this year. So I want you to look at the trend line from the beginning, from around 2002 to 2022, and I'm trying to just paint this picture so when you see this, that you'll understand what I'm talking about. West Virginia in these following slides, and this slide and the following slides, is going to be compared to Mississippi and Florida. Florida, simply because Florida has had this law the longest. They adopted in 2002. Mississippi adopted in 2013. So West Virginia is being compared to these two other states that have had the law, and with implementation and all the supports have actually seen some success in the law. So on this first slide with data, we're looking at West Virginia overall. West Virginia is in green, right? So we're looking at West Virginia overall, grade 4 reading for all students. In 2002, West Virginian students, 4th grade students, were at a scale score of 219. In 2000, I'm sorry, it should be 22 at the end. That the score is now 205 with the most recent administration. So by 2022, West Virginia is outperformed by Mississippi and performs a full grade level below the national average. The national average is in gray, and it's at 216. But in 2002, 4th graders in West Virginia outperformed their peers nationally and in Mississippi by 16 skill score points, which is over 1.5 grade levels. 1 grade level equals 10 skill score points. So that's overall, right? In 2017, there was a peak in West Virginia around 217, and the scores have declined since then. Okay, so let's look at white students. Now, the thing about the nation, and one thing that Peggy Carr said when they were talking about NAEP data from the National Center for Education Statistics, was that across the board nationally, it seems as if the gap between Black students, white students, Hispanic students, white students is closing. But in actuality, in reality, our white students across the country are not performing well either. And they're performing lower than a lot of our white students have performed in the past, over decades, right? So if you look at where in 2022, white 4th graders in West Virginia are performing worse than their 2002 peers by nearly 1.5 grade levels, and are performing 2 grade levels below the national average. And when we look at Black students, and I'm gonna have like a summary slide in a couple of slides. There were 40 jurisdictions that had enough Black students to be considered to as far as being comparable in NAEP. You know, you have to have a certain N score for that to be reported. There were 40 jurisdictions, and West Virginia's performance for its 4th grade Black students in reading is last at number 40, right? So in 2002, Black 4th graders outperformed Mississippi by nearly 2 full grade levels, but by 2022, West Virginia was performing more than a half grade level worse and lagging the national average. So we have to begin looking under the hood and looking at our subgroups so that we can ensure that we are addressing the needs of all students. And lastly, for our economically disadvantaged students in West Virginia, in 2002, economically disadvantaged 4th graders outperformed their Mississippi peers by 1.5 full grade levels, but by 2022, they're performing more than 1.5 grade levels worse and lagging the national average by nearly a grade level. And these are our students who are economically disadvantaged. We'll make sure that you all get these slides and that the last year, 2022, is corrected on a few of those slides. So what does this mean? This is the context for the state comparisons. West Virginia for all students is currently ranked at 49th. For white students, 51st, and for Black students, 40th. And of course, free and reduced lunch, 47th. And if you look across with Florida and Mississippi and the public, you can see the rankings for those states, you know, of course, even post-pandemic. Now, post-pandemic, you know, I think someone said earlier, we weren't doing well pre-pandemic really as a country, right? 1 out of 3 kids. But post-pandemic, there were a few states that kind of held their own with it. And I know that for Florida and Mississippi, for us being, states that have really just put a stake in the ground around the science of reading and supports for all of our, stakeholders, teachers, administrators, students, parents, and families, we've been able to hold our own, although there is still so much work to do. Note that the gap between white and Black students is not a large gap. But again, that's because white students in West Virginia scale score declined. I do want to make one important note around student population for West Virginia. It's of course a lot lower than Florida's. A lot of places are, almost half the size of Mississippi. But West Virginia per pupil expenditure spends about $12,000 on students per pupil, whereas Florida and Mississippi are both around 10,000 or 9,000 respectively. Okay, so reading strategies don't discriminate. I'm not going to read all of these things to you. I just want you to know that it's not just West Virginia, right? It's not about whether it's Black, white, lower income, higher income. A lot of our students across the board in our country are struggling. So we have to make sure that where we see pockets of success or we see opportunities to improve and to strengthen what we're doing by also empowering teachers and empowering those who are in school districts and who are leading this work, then we have to be bold and take those opportunities. So what's next for West Virginia? It has to be this interconnected system from policy to practice, that it is going to take everyone. And as you notice, state legislature is there, Department of Education, and the colleges of education, right? Along with our district superintendents and leaders, principals, and our teachers, and of course, our parents and students are at the core. I will entertain any questions at this time.
All right, Dr. Burke, thank you first. If you can hang around, I'm going to have the next one go.
Sounds
because
good.
of time, okay?
Okay.
We have time for questions. We'll let that for both of you. So thank you, Dr. Burke. Damien Pacoda from ECS. Damien, you're up.
Thank you. I will also share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Damien Pacoda. I'm a senior policy analyst with Education Commission of the States. For those of you who are not familiar with ECS, we are a nonpartisan research organization that partners with education policy leaders to address issues by sharing resources and expertise. Our commissioners include governors and their staff, legislators, K-12 education chiefs, and post-secondary education staff representing all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and United States territories. We believe in the power of learning from experience because we know that informed policymakers create better education policy. We provide nonpartisan information and resources to policymakers. There are 4 main areas of work in which we do this: research from early childhood education to post-secondary, reporting, convenings, and counseling, such as what I am doing here today. Today, ECS was invited to talk about early numeracy, specifically addressing research on the topic and a review of how other states are approaching this issue. I will be covering research behind early numeracy, new reporting around math achievement over pandemic impacted years, and examples of policy activity across states with a closer look at recent legislation in Alabama and some legislation that South Carolina is currently considering. To start, we'll take a look at the research to understand why education policymakers and leaders are focusing on early numeracy or early math. Early math achievement is a strong predictor of later math achievement, and additional research has shown that early math achievement is also a strong predictor of high school graduation and college going. This chart shows the findings of a longitudinal study that followed and assessed students through the educational experience. The students who start in the lowest quartile of achievement, which is the gray bar on this, in kindergarten have slower growth through grade 8 than those in the middle or higher quartile. We also know that when students enter kindergarten, there's already a gap in knowledge between students from low income or middle or high income backgrounds. On this chart, the disparity between students from low income families, the orange bar, is shown against those from middle income families, the purple bar, across multiple math concepts at age 4, from number, arithmetic, geometry, measurement, patterns, and composite. During these last 3 years, the pandemic has disrupted learning for students across the country, either because of school closures and the challenges of remote learning, extended absences, or both. A number of large studies have shown that during these COVID-impacted school years, elementary students saw larger test score reductions in math than in reading, with a sizable drop in math test scores between 2019 and 2021. This chart shows math achievement between 2019 and 2022 for grades 3 through 8 on the MAP assessment. The research team at NWEA, the organization that developed the math assessment, looked at results from over 8 million children taking the assessment and found that math achievement remains below pre-pandemic levels as of this last spring. We do see some rebounding between 2021 and 2022 for younger students, which is promising, but they have not yet caught up to pre-pandemic levels. Not reflected here, but this report also highlights that achievement gaps in high poverty schools remains larger than those in low poverty schools, and students attending those schools will likely take longer to recover this learning as well. The recent NAEP scores from 2022, you just heard Dr. Burke talk about literacy scores. These are national scores that show a drop in math scores, which is the largest decline since the initial assessment in 1990. For grade 4, there was a 5-point drop compared to 2019, and grade 8 saw an 8-point drop compared to 2019. These are national scores, not West Virginia scores. With that context, I want to shift gears to talk more how state policymakers are enhancing early math education. ECS released a 50-state comparison in 2020 on K-3 policies. While at least 17 states in the District of Columbia have policies that require students to be retained if they are not grade level proficient in reading by the end of 3rd grade, we did not identify any states that require students to demonstrate grade level numeracy by the end of 3rd grade. However, in this analysis, we also examined requirements for pre-service qualifications and professional development for in-service educators in STEM subject, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. At least 20 states require some math knowledge for pre-service educators, with 5 additional states only requiring professional development in math for in-service educators. Additionally, in recent years, states have enacted legislation in improving educator competencies in math through grants or other incentives, requiring research-based math curricula, and generally prioritizing and funding STEM education and teacher professional development. Finally, it's worth noting that 20% of LEAs plan to devote American Rescue Plan ESSER funding towards math and ELA supports such as tutoring and extended learning time. Now I will dive into the legislation that Alabama recently enacted, as well as South Carolina. Alabama's Senate Bill 171, which was enacted earlier this year, and it will take time to understand how this develops moving forward, aims to ensure grade level math proficiency for Alabama students by the end of 5th grade. I'll highlight a few key provisions. For example, the bill created a task force charged with providing recommendations to the superintendent and state board for math curricula and intervention curricula, continuing of educator development or professional development, and a list of approved assessment systems for screening, diagnostic, and formative assessments that LEAs may choose from. It also created an Office of Math Improvement that is charged with the implementation of this program. The bill provides for coaching and support, including language that allows for coaches who must be Alabama certified teachers and are funded through state appropriations to be deployed to each local education agency. And it also requires targeted evidence-based interventions to support students who are screened and assessed to have math deficiencies. House Bill 3613 in South Carolina was introduced last year and is still currently pending. And we'll certainly let you know if anything happens in South Carolina on this, but we thought it was important to share since they're the only other state that's considering this. This bill would add requirements for numeracy proficiency to South Carolina's 3rd grade literacy retention statute. The bill would require the State Department of Education to approve no more than 5 reliable and valid early literacy and numeracy screening assessment instructions and require LEAs to administer those assessments. The purpose of the screening assessments would be to identify appropriate interventions, and schools would be prohibited from using the results of screening assessments to retain students. The legislation would also require the department to track, screen, and monitor early numeracy programs of kindergarten through 3rd grade students at the school, district, and state level. Finally, I will leave you with some considerations for policy related to enhancing math and achievement. We have some additional notes on this, but I'll just highlight the main areas. And if you have questions or want to follow up, I'd be happy to provide additional context. First, the importance of educator preparation, as well as ongoing professional development. Second, reliable and valid screening and diagnostic assessments can be a tool for tracking progress, identifying the right intervention strategies for individual students. Third, given the impact of early math achievement on middle and high school math achievement, as well as other long-term outcomes, consider the importance of high-quality early learning and the integration of numeracy instruction with other learning domains. And finally, family engagement is critical in promoting student success. And with that, along with Dr. Burke, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you again for having me today.
Thank you. Jackie? Is Dr. Howard online?
No.
No, we don't have it. Okay. So that gives a chance for both questions. So you could put both of them up. All right, those both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for Dr. Burke. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Could you throw the average scale score for all students back up on the screen again? Because all of your charts, when they were up there, your picture blocked out everything after 2017.
Oh, no. Okay. Let me
Too.
say it again. I'm sorry.
It wasn't just your picture, it was Damien's too.
Okay.
So we've got these things that showed it, but if you would show it up, because there was a precipitous drop off after it, the average scale score, grade 4 reading all students. That's not the one.
Nope. Okay. Let me go up.
Yeah, there you go. There, any one of those. Notice from 2017 on, West Virginia drops off precipitously compared to the other 2 states.
Right.
Now, I'm wondering if maybe COVID had something to do with that, but A, COVID affected every state, and B, COVID came a couple of years after 2017. So
Right.
I'm wondering if you have any idea why we dropped off so precipitously compared to Florida and Mississippi.
Well, I guess that would be a question for those of you who are there. And I know the superintendent is new to the role, but that's my question. When I ask states, when I see such a drop as this, I wonder like, well, did any policies change? Did leadership change? Like what happened from 2017 to 2019 for the drop that initially happened, like you said, pre-COVID. So I'm not aware of West Virginia's,
Okay.
of course, landscape.
And I have one other quick question because we're running short of time.
Yep.
When you put up the dollar per student, the per pupil contribution, was that state only, or does in every case it includes state and local contribution?
This is state contributions.
State contribution only.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that's what I want to know. See, because in West Virginia, a much higher portion of the per pupil expenditure comes from the state than is the case with just about every other state in the union except Hawaii. And that's why I think a chart like that does make us look a little bit worse than we really are.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You have a question?
I tried to hurry.
You did great. Question? All right, well, thank you both. Appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we don't have item 5 today. Going back up to item 3, approval of minutes. We only have 6 senators. We need 1 more. Does anyone have a split personality? No, I can't do that.
You're not a senator, Clark.
We could be here for a day.
Of the road center.
All right, any other business for the committee? All right, entertain a motion from Ron.
I move we adjourn.
All those in favor of adjournment? Have a good evening.